Not every alliance in today's geopolitical chessboard is founded on friendship. Many are forged out of mutual interests, opportunistic strategies, and even covert operations designed to benefit one party over another. Throughout history, Africa has often found itself entangled in the struggles of larger powers. But in the 21st century, as African nations increasingly assert their independence, a troubling trend is emerging. Foreign influence hasn't disappeared, it's just wearing a new mask. For years, rumors and reports have circulated that certain Western powers, namely France and the United States, have played a quiet but significant role in Africa's internal conflicts, especially in the Sahel region. Though often presented as partners in counterterrorism, the on-the-ground reality suggests that these alliances sometimes deepen insecurity instead of resolving it. Now, a new name has entered the conversation, Ukraine. At first glance, it seems unlikely. Ukraine is itself engulfed in a fierce and existential conflict against Russia, defending its sovereignty on the front lines of Eastern Europe. However, recent revelations suggest that Ukraine's reach may extend well beyond its immediate battlefield. Evidence and public statements point to possible involvement in West African conflict zones, raising questions no one seems willing to ask. Why would a nation fighting for survival in Europe reportedly engage in clandestine operations thousands of kilometers away? The revelations began unfolding during the Kazan Digital Forum in Russia, held in June 2025. The event focused on bridging the digital divide between Russia and the global South, with representatives from over 30 African nations. But amidst discussions about technology and development, a darker thread began to emerge. During one session, Mali's delegates took the floor not to speak about connectivity or innovation, but to raise the alarm about infiltration and foreign interference. Suleiman Koulibaly, a senior Malian official, made a chilling statement. He claimed that armed groups surrounding Mali were receiving external support, and that support, he said, came from Ukraine. The room fell silent, then erupted in whispers. These were not mere political accusations thrown out for dramatic effect. According to Koulibaly, the claims were backed by on-the-ground findings and confirmed intelligence. What followed was a wave of corroborations from Russian diplomats and African security officials. Fousseini Ouattara, a high-ranking figure in Mali's Transitional Defense Council, explained further, weapons intended for Ukrainian defense were allegedly being rerouted into the hands of insurgent groups in the Sahel. Most disturbingly, these were not seasoned fighters but rural villagers, fishermen, herders, and young men from isolated communities who somehow had access to advanced technology and weapons. How does a young man who has never left his village operate encrypted communication devices, pilot drones, and use NATO-grade rifles? That question has haunted investigators. These tools require not only access but training, structured, formal instruction that can only come from highly skilled individuals. So who is providing this training, and why? Local counterterrorism operations added another layer to the narrative. In one such operation, military forces reportedly seized weapons, communications gear, and drones with Ukrainian markings. One device, a drone wreckage, had inscriptions in Ukrainian. Among the evidence, documents linking certain rebel factions to external intelligence networks were reportedly found. These weren't just random discoveries, they were potential clues that pointed toward deliberate strategy and coordination. An even more unsettling development was the alleged use of Ukrainian-made FPV drones modified for tactical strikes, not surveillance. According to one report, these drones were deployed in active combat, targeting army outposts in Mali. Combined with intelligence leaks and eyewitness testimonies, the picture began to resemble a modern-day proxy war. But instead of playing out in Europe or Asia, it was happening quietly in the deserts and forests of Africa. For many, this was the first time the Sahel region had been described not as a hotspot of isolated insurgency, but as a battleground shaped by international power, rivalries, and the implications were deeply personal. African soldiers, many under-equipped and under-supported, were dying in attacks that, according to officials, were orchestrated or supported with foreign intelligence and weaponry. Ukraine, for its part, officially denied any direct involvement. Spokespersons dismissed the allegations as politically motivated or rooted in misinformation. However, in a twist that surprised many, an official spokesperson from Ukraine's intelligence service, Andriy Yusov, made an eyebrow-raising admission. In August 2024, speaking live on Ukrainian television, he acknowledged that Ukrainian intelligence had supplied tactical information to anti-government groups in Mali specifically aimed at forces aligned with Russia. Though framed within the larger context of Ukraine's war with Russia, the statement sent shockwaves across Africa. It wasn't just what was said, it was what it implied. The speaker didn't deny involvement. In fact, he confirmed it, suggesting that these actions were part of Ukraine's broader effort to strike at Russian influence, wherever it exists. Shortly after the televised statement, the same rebel groups in Mali released their own message written in Ukrainian. They expressed solidarity with Kyiv and even offered to hand over captured Russian personnel. As a show of alliance, the message was clear: these groups were not operating in a vacuum. They had support, and they were not afraid to say from where. But for Mali, this wasn't just a foreign policy issue, it was a tragedy. In July 2024, a devastating attack near the Algerian border resulted in the deaths of 47 Malian soldiers and 80 for Wagner operatives. It was the deadliest strike on joint forces since Russia had entered the region 2 years prior. According to all accounts, the operation was executed with precision and benefited from advanced planning, possibly including satellite surveillance and tactical coordination. The response from Mali was swift. Diplomatic ties with Ukraine were severed, and strong words followed. But what was more alarming was the response or lack thereof from the international community. The West remained largely silent. The United Nations did not issue statements. No investigations were launched. No emergency sessions were called. In contrast, Russian officials were quick to speak out. Maria Zakharova, spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry, criticized the West's selective attention. She accused Western governments of ignoring the evidence while continuing to portray Ukraine as a helpless victim on the global stage. According to her, if any African nation had admitted to supporting armed attacks abroad, the world would erupt in condemnation. But in this case, silence ruled. Across Africa, civil society began to respond. In Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali nations, already working together in the newly formed alliance of Sahel states, activists, researchers, and journalists started to question the global double standards. Organizations like the Burkina Faso Black Defense League and the Pan-African Revolutionary Council issued statements condemning what they viewed as a dangerous and destabilizing pattern. They argued that weapons sent to Ukraine were not all staying in Ukraine, and that some were making their way into terrorist hands across Africa. Worse, they believed these transfers were not accidents, but part of a larger plan to maintain instability and preserve Western influence in resource-rich regions. The reasoning is stark. The Sahel is home to vast reserves of gold, uranium, and rare minerals. Whoever controls this region doesn't just control land, they control global markets, energy resources, and political leverage. And according to these critics, chaos is a tool used to delay independence, justify military interventions, and keep African governments dependent on outside help. Faced with these challenges, the Sahel states didn't stay silent. In an unprecedented move, they sent a joint letter to the United Nations Security Council demanding that Ukraine be held accountable. They called for investigations into the reported weapons transfers, intelligence sharing, and drone operations. They warned that the current path risked destabilizing the entire continent, not just the Sahel. Yet, months after the letter was sent, the world still waits for a response. No international hearings have been held. No independent inquiries have been announced. For many Africans, this absence of action sends a powerful message. Some nations are simply untouchable. If they're allies of the West, they're shielded from scrutiny even when the lives of African civilians and soldiers are at stake. But the Sahel Alliance is not backing down. In the face of pressure, threats, and covert destabilization, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are standing firm. These countries are pursuing a new vision, one grounded in sovereignty, self-reliance, and strategic partnerships that do not rely on historical colonizers. Their growing ties with nations like Russia and China mark a shift from traditional Western dependencies to diversified cooperation. That's not to say these new partnerships are without risk, but for many African nations, the West has had decades to prove itself, and in many cases it failed. Security arrangements were promised, but attacks continued. Development loans were granted, but economic independence remained elusive. Hollow speeches were made, but little changed. So now, African countries are carving their own path. They're forming regional alliances, reshaping foreign relations, and most importantly, speaking with one voice. And that voice is calling out the hypocrisy of global politics, where some victims are acknowledged and others ignored, where some nations are praised for resisting occupation, while others are punished for asserting autonomy. In the end, this is not just a story about Ukraine or Mali. It's about the struggle of the global South to be heard, to be respected, and to be free from exploitation. It's about the power of narrative: who gets to be the hero, who becomes the villain, and who is written out of the story entirely. The Sahel may be remote, its deserts may seem distant to viewers in New York or Paris, but its people are not invisible. They bleed, they resist, and now they speak. Their message is simple: Africa is no longer anyone's battlefield. It is its own. So now, we ask you, the viewers, what do you believe? Are these just theories, or does the silence of the powerful say more than words ever could? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories that challenge the narrative and bring light to forgotten voices, don't forget to like and subscribe.